If you could introduce yourself very briefly, what your role is, what you do, that'd be awesome.
Hi, my name is Miles Golland. I'm head of geography at Godolphin Latimer School.
But yeah, I guess then I just want to talk about you mentioned to me that you wanted to specifically look at the sort of year 9 program. I just wanted you to if you could talk a bit more about that and in terms of why you think year 9 is so important and what you've been doing differently in terms of what the curriculum currently says.
Yeah, so the main reason year 9 is so important is because some of those students won't go on to study geography GCSE. We get about 2/3 of students doing geography GCSE here, but what about the third? So it's really important in year 9 that they leave geography with a good understanding of geographical issues, a really good understanding of geographical issues. And I think for me personally, a really good understanding of how climate change feeds into these geographical issues that we have studied in the past.
Okay. And then, so I guess then, like, how do you interact with the students, especially the ones that aren't going to be pursuing sort of geography beyond the year 9 level? Are there sort of particular methods or like ways you teach them that you think work quite well to help them to sort of retain that knowledge about climate issues?
I think making it real for them. So coming up, like explaining to them the big picture of climate change, which is fundamentally that we're moving from this very stable Holocene period towards a period of change, and change will be the new norm over the course of the next however many hundreds of years, and making students aware that they are going to be living their entire lives in a world that is changing and is going to continue to be changing. Last year was the warmest year on record, but in 50 years it will be cool compared to what we're going to approach in the future. So students really need to be equipped with this understanding that the world is changing in a climate sense. And if they can think back to year 9 geography when they are reflecting on that as they're a little bit older, as they undoubtedly will, that'd be great.
Okay, great. What do you think is sort of lacking from the current curriculum or things that you needed to improve, which is why the sort of GNL geography program does it a little bit differently?
So with physical geography, we take an Earth systems approach. So we look at the spheres in the world: the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, the cryosphere, except the biosphere. And we look at the interrelationships between those spheres, and we do that quite young. So we do that in years 7, 8, and 9.
Okay.
Traditionally, geography here would have been taught in silos, so separate topics. So in this term, you're learning tectonics. In this term, you're learning rivers. In this term, you're learning coasts. But we've tried to make the course more synoptic and more interdisciplinary as well, I think, as a result of that.
Okay, I guess then, because obviously geography plays perhaps the biggest role in sort of educating young people about climate change in school. But I was wondering if what you think the role is of other subjects, like across other departments in the school, if they have any sort of role to play in sort of educating young people about climate change as well, how they could tackle the issue.
Oh, definitely. I mean, obviously science, so chemistry, atmospheric chemistry, physics. There's a ton of physics, obviously, that they could study. Thermal expansion of seawater, for example, just to name one. Biology, absolutely. There's loads of links to climate change within biology, and I'm sure they teach a lot of things like ecosystem succession and how that's changing invasive species. I know not really linked to climate change, but there could be crossovers there. In terms of other subjects, so certainly, I mean, climate change can really feed into all of the arts subjects. If you think about philosophy, students could learn about, for example, the moral hazards created by geoengineering solutions. In something like English, they could learn about literature. I think there is a whole area of English which relates to the climate. They call it blue literature, I think. And in politics, there's a whole area of sort of climate justice. Obviously, there's a huge amount of geopolitics when it comes to climate change globally, but also nationally and locally too. So it can definitely drip into all the subjects in school.
But yeah, I guess then just as like a sort of final question, is there anything particularly at GNL or the geography curriculum in the UK generally that you would like to change in the future, or a new topic that's coming up that you think you'd like to incorporate next year?
I mean, the concept of the Anthropocene is quite interesting, and I wonder whether we should refer to that more, not necessarily in the geological sense, but in the way that knowledge of the human impact on the natural environment, I think that can be encapsulated by the phrase Anthropocene. So humans having such an impact on the natural environment that it's a new geological epoch, and that sort of magnitude is, I think, helpful for students to understand. Maybe we could teach more about that in the future.
Okay. Yeah, because I think the Anthropocene is quite interesting in that it has both the very geological component to it and the more sort of theoretical, conceptual sort of debate surrounding the name itself in terms of whether or not it should be called the Anthropocene. Because I know there's quite a few other scenes out there. Would you be more interested in the sort of theoretical, conceptual side of it?
I would, yeah. I'm naturally quite interested in that side of things anyway, and I think students, my general overriding principle, I guess, personal philosophy, is that students can understand quite complicated concepts, particularly in school like this one. So I think they could grasp the magnitude of the Anthropocene. Yeah. We actually call it the, because we look at, as I say, with the Earth system side of things in year 7, 8, 9, we call it the anthroposphere, which is a bit clunky, but like the human impact on the natural environment, basically.
Yeah.
And we actually don't teach an awful lot about that, but we probably could.
Okay. I mean,
the other thing I would like to teach more of, and I think is really, really important, is wildfires. So we teach hazards a lot: earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, and we have taught hazards for years, but we haven't really ever taught about wildfires. And I think they are super interesting from a geographical perspective. What are the factors affecting the increase in wildfires? But also, is a key hazard associated with climate change. We're going to see an increase in wildfires over the next 100 years or so, and I think it's probably something students should be more aware of. And there's so much to say about wildfires as well, in terms of forest density, like sparking frequencies, and the influence of building in wildfire zones, for example, particularly in the US, where they build houses out of wood. There's quite a lot to say there. It's some really interesting geography.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a very good encapsulation of like the human and the physical aspects in both of like how wildfires occur and how they spread, but then also sort of how wildfires play a role in indigenous knowledge and in terms of like slash and burn farming to some extent, that like wildfires are a sort of natural process, but obviously when they become exacerbated or when they come into prolonged contact with sort of human civilization, what sort of happens at that interface is quite interesting.
Absolutely, and that, you just talking there, that would be a fantastic scheme of work for like 4 or 5 weeks or so in lower school. If we had time and space to do it in middle school, that'd be great. That'd be really, really interesting. And I think more generally we could include more about indigenous knowledge systems, because we don't really, some of the human geography is pretty sort of classic, and I wonder whether we could incorporate more anthropological perspectives, I suppose, younger down the school, and that might include teaching them about indigenous knowledge systems so that they value those sort of things.
Well, I guess, would you say in the curriculum as a whole, whether in the lower school or sort of in the GCSE, A-level, IB curriculum, is there quite a heavy sort of focus on a more Eurocentric perspective on geography?
Yes, and we have talked as a department recently about how the division between developed and developing world is making us increasingly uncomfortable. I think there are some changes to be made in terms of how we talk about global development. So I'm thinking about Factfulness by Hans Rosling.
Yes.
We read that with the year 8s this year, and he talks about level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 countries. And the idea of developed versus developing is, if developed, we've made it, and developing, they're coming up to us. I think that whole arrangement needs to be questioned. And actually students in Key Stage 3 are beginning to question that very premise, actually. So I think we probably need to look at that.
That's really nice to hear, because I remember in my time with the geography book club, I think we only looked at Factfulness in A-level. So it wasn't really something we came across or really questioned until we read the book. But obviously that's in the sixth form at that point. So it's quite nice to hear that.
It is, absolutely. Yeah, in chapters. All the year 8s here, all 120 of them have read Factfulness now. We did it over the course of a term. And that was good. That was powerful. So we'll do more of that reading non-fiction text with year groups, I think, in lower SPIC. Yeah, I mean, the tricky thing when it comes to implementing climate change into the curriculums of different subjects is actually getting teachers to replan their schemes of work, and that's super difficult. So we, even in a school like this one, we don't communicate that much between departments.
Yeah.
So climate change is going to be presented in very different ways by different teachers, by different departments, and we probably need some sort of cross-curricular interdisciplinary day or something